Today on Sports Central, we'll be going over our next final prediction of this offseason, and it will be over the Oregon Ducks. And this is a team that was 12-2 last season, and they overall had a great season, winning the Pac-12 championship, as they have for many seasons in the past. But today we're going to be going over 2020, why I think Oregon could win another Pac-12 championship next season, and why they could be a potential college world playoff contender. We're also going to be going over your returning production, along with a full preview and prediction on every game on Oregon's schedule heading into the 2020 season. With that, let's look at your season trends from the last season. Of course, they were 7-1 between September and October, and they were 5-1 between November and the postseason. So, yeah, they were 12-2 overall last season, and I mean, they had a couple of losses down the stretch, which, I mean, if Oregon could have gotten a couple of wins there, I mean, this team could have easily been in the college football playoff last season. Of course, they lost to Arizona State late in the season, and that was really what ended up breaking their chances of even making it. Of course, they lost to Auburn in week number 1, too, so I mean, that didn't really help, but in the end, I think Oregon definitely would have had a legit chance to make it into the playoff last season if they just could have won that big game against Arizona State. But anyway, they had some good wins other than that. They did beat Washington on the road 35-31. They beat Washington State 37-35. They had a blowout win at USC 56-24. Another blowout win against Utah in the Pac-12 championship 37-15. And yeah, let me remind you, last season, Utah was definitely, I mean, they were a top 15 team for the majority of the season. So that was a team that was very good. And so for Oregon to get a big win like that, very impressive for Oregon. And they also beat Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl 28-27. And that was quite a game between Oregon and Wisconsin in that one. But yeah, in the end, still a great season for Oregon, getting a 12-2 record and a Rose Bowl win. As far as the returning production looks, of course, you lose your star quarterback, Justin Herbert, and he went very early on in the previous NFL draft, so he's going to be a really tough loss for this team. Of course, he had 3,400 yards with 32 touchdowns and 6 interceptions last season. He also had a 66% completion rate, so he was by far, I'd say, the best quarterback in the Pac-12 and one of the best in the nation in general. I mean, he put up some amazing stats last season, and I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him in the NFL. And of course, last season going into 2019, Justin Herbert was looked at to be one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, as which he was. He definitely did not disappoint last season. And even though, I mean, his completion rate was 66%, which isn't the best in the nation, but he still had a good completion rate, and he still had a good touchdown interception ratio with a 32-6. As far as the running back situation, of course, they returned their top running back, C.J. Verdell, which that's going to be a big return for this team. Of course, last season he had over 1,300 yards for this team, so he was able to put up some very good stats for this Oregon team last season. They also returned their second running back in Travis Dye, which both of them, of course, I mean, he was another great running back for this team, and both of them, both C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye, both really were great running backs for this team in general last season, and that's going to have a big impact on this team, I think. Of course, Travis Dye had 817 yards with a touchdown last season too, so both of those top running backs combined for 2,100 yards, over 2,100 yards last season with 9 touchdowns. So once again, both of those running backs are going to be huge for this team next season, I think. This receiving core also looks very good, returning their top receiver in Johnny Johnson III, as he had 836 yards with 7 touchdowns last season. They also returned their second receiver in Jalen Redd, which Jalen Redd last season was another big-time receiver for this team with 500 yards, along with a decent 4 touchdowns last season. So, I mean, in the end, I mean, this receiving core is looking very good, even though they're losing their third receiver in Juwan Johnson, which last season he had stats similar to what Redd had last season. And of course, he had just right around 460 yards with 4 touchdowns. But yeah, in the end, I mean, this receiving core is looking just fine. I think they'll be fine with their top 2 running backs in Johnny Johnson and Jalen Redd. And that's going to be very helpful for whichever quarterback's under center. Of course, it looks like Tyler Shaw right now, which honestly, I mean, he doesn't look all that terrible. We really haven't seen him play very much. But in the time that he did play last season, he threw 15 passes, and he completed 80% of those. He also had 144 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he was pretty impressive in the time that he did play for Oregon last season. But then again, there's still plenty of uncertainty around him. And I mean, he could be either a great quarterback or a bad quarterback. We have no clue. But I think for Oregon in the end, this team will be just fine, even though they're losing Justin Herbert. Of course, that's going to be a huge loss. Once again, I mean, it's tough for a quarterback like him to come around. But in the end, for Oregon, I mean, they've got a great recruiting class coming in too. So you can't forget about that. But I mean, the big impacts of this team are going to be on the offensive line and parts of the defense as well, as they're losing 3 on the offensive line. That's going to be tough to deal with. And you also lose 2 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers. So The defense loses 4 starters, which really is not terrible. That's right around average. I mean, most teams lose 4 on the defense anyway, so I mean, that's not all that terrible. But in the end, brings up the question of impacts of losing Herbert once again. I mean, it's tough for a quarterback like that leaving to not have an impact on a team, and I'm sure it's going to have an impact on Oregon next season. I mean, this team may decline. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm as confident that they'll make it to the College Football Playoff next season as I was for last season, but still, this team has got a lot of talent, and they still have got a lot of potential, I think, to put up a great season. Will Oregon win the Pac-12 again next season? Of course, you got a couple of good teams in that conference. I mean, this Pac-12 conference is much better last season in comparison to how they've been in the past few years. I mean, you had Oregon and Utah, 2 very good teams that were playoff contenders last season. And I mean, next season you also have Utah, but you also have California. Do not sleep on Cal going into next season. I mean, when Chase Garbers was their quarterback, I mean, he led that team to a great start to the season. And once he got injured, that Cal team kind of dropped off. But in the end, I mean, watch out for that Cal team next season. But in the end, I think for the Pac-12, Oregon definitely would be my favorite to win it as far as next season goes. Still, we're pretty early on, but I definitely think Oregon would be my early favorite. Chances of making the playoff in 2020 for Oregon, of course, I mean, this is a team that I'd say, even though they're losing plenty of talent, I still think, I mean, they've got a good chance if they can go undefeated or maybe even 11-1 and win the conference championship. I think Oregon definitely is a good bet to make it to the playoff next season. I mean, really, if they lose to Ohio State in the first couple weeks and they still go undefeated beyond that Ohio State game, I still think Oregon has a pretty good chance to make it to the College Football Playoff. I mean, they still got a lot of talent and a lot of potential, but in the end, I mean, their schedule is really not all that easy next season. Of course, you got Ohio State. We also have to play North Dakota State. Don't sleep on them. And then you got Hawaii, which made a bowl game last season. You also have Colorado on the road, followed by Washington, and then a very tough road game at Cal. And then you got Stanford, Arizona, USC. That's going to be a big game, too. You got Arizona State on November 13th, followed by 2 road trips to Washington State and Oregon State. But anyway, with that, let's look at September. Here's what I'm expecting. I'll give you a 3-1 record. I think you'd beat North Dakota State, and I think you'd beat Hawaii and Colorado. However, I think you do take a loss to Ohio State, and that one was really tough. I mean, with Oregon being at home, that's going to help them a ton in that game, I think. I think that game is going to be one of the best of the entire season. Definitely be watching out for that Oregon and Ohio State game. I mean, it would have been even more incredible if we could have seen Justin Herbert and Justin Fields going head-to-head. That would have been a really great matchup. But in the end, it's still going to be a great matchup between Oregon and Ohio State there. But I think Ohio State gets the win in the end. I mean, in the end, you got to look at the conferences. And Ohio State next season is in a much better conference than Oregon is. I mean, the Big Ten quite possibly is the best conference in all of college football. I mean, them in the SEC. I mean, it's those 2 conferences to the end of the day. But I mean, for Oregon next season, I mean, this is still a team. I mean, especially at the beginning of the season, they're going to have a lot of adjusting to do. I mean, they've had Justin Fields in there for quite a while, and it's going to be a weird adjustment, I think, to move away from him. So I think that in general, it kind of gives Ohio State the edge in that one. And I also think Ohio State next season, I mean, it's them and Clemson for who I would say would be my favorites to win the national championship next season. I mean, Ohio State is definitely going to be a great candidate to win that national championship next season. They've got Justin Fields, a great offense, Ryan Day, who did really well last season, and a great defense. I mean, that team has got all the tools available to make it to the playoff next season. And yeah, so I think Ohio State does take the win there in the end, but still, I think Oregon keeps it close. So you're 3-1 between September, and I think you also beat Hawaii and Colorado as well. But as far as your October goes, I think you also go 4-0. I think you have close games to Washington, and watch out for that California game. That one's going to be tough. I think California next season, I mean, that's going to be a huge game for them. I mean, if California can beat Oregon, that team is for real, I definitely think. And I mean, next season, I mean, with Chase Garbers, if he's able to stay healthy, and if he's able to lead that team to a great season, and if that team in general has enough talent to be able to do well, I think watch out for that California team. They could come out of absolutely nowhere. I mean, I've seen some people predicting them to go 10-2 or 11-1 next season even, which I don't think that's possible. But I think California next season definitely is a team that should be way up there in the Pac-12 South. But as far as that Stanford game goes, I think you do end up getting a win there. And I also think you beat Arizona. So yeah, you do go 4-0 through your October. You're going to be 7-1 before your November, which I also think you win all 4 games in your November. I think you beat USC, and I also think you beat Arizona State. That's going to be a close game. So yeah, watch out for that. But in the end, I think you get wins over Washington State and Oregon State as well. brings up your record prediction to be 11-1. But in the end, let me know your thoughts on Oregon in the comments below. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel, and I'd really appreciate that. As always, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.